my arm with Toon Kings and men of Britonia. So let's set the tone, listening to the one and only. We've got to that old world charm.
Hello, our lovely old world, I don't know, charmed audience. Welcome to That Old World Charm. My name's Adam Camilleri. This is episode 6, the hallowed episode 6. Almost getting to the end of our journey through the main components and main sequence of playing a game of this brand new old world. I am joined by a little bit of a different trio today. First and foremost, though, Peter the Falcon. Hello, brother. How you doing? Yeah, he's on form. And the Sweetmeats himself is unfortunately unwell, but he's been joined by the intrepid one and only, formerly a tech priest of the 41st millennium. I don't know what would be the equivalence in the old world. We might have to think tank that in our opening segment, but Richard Hughes, otherwise known as Techpriest Dickie on a myriad of different shows, Grim After Dark. He's also our editor for this show, and we're very welcoming him onto the show now. How you doing, brother?
Hey guys, how's it going? Sorry, I've been listening to so many episodes. I assumed we all had to talk in weird voices the first time.
It's just me and Danny.
Yeah. I maintain some semblance of professionalism in this absolute rabble of a team. But yeah, what the hell it would be the equivalent of a tech priest?
Skink Priest Dickie.
Skink Priest Dickie. That's pretty good, actually.
It does have a nice ring to it. Actually.
It does, actually.
Skink Priest Dickie. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Slaughtermaster Dickie.
No.
Butcher. No. Yeah, Butcher. Definitely. You seen the mustache he's got on? Butcher.
Yeah. That's nice.
Hell of a stash. Anyway, we are getting very close to the conclusion of working our way through the main, I guess what I just mentioned before, the main rules of playing a game of the old world. We are into the combat phase, and then maybe we're doing half an episode next week on the psychology of battle, and then breaking down and jumping straight into things like reviewing, magic armors and exciting stuff and cool stuff like that. So hopefully we've made this like man reads book, extensive, VCR instructions portion of our great show entertaining as possible for you, but there is some very exciting stuff on the horizon. Then we're going to get into some faction focuses and all stuff like that. Should be extremely good. This is a 2-part show, as it always is every week. First part comes out for you guys, lovingly curated by the Dickie, the Skink Priest himself, who's
Is that actually going to stick? This is my name.
I think it is.
Probably. Are there any other priests? Warrior priests? There's warrior priests in Empire.
I don't think it matches up. I mean, like, he could be like shitty engineer Dickie.
Well, why do you have to add the shitty part of it? Right.
Why can't
it just be engineer Dickie?
That's what it is, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well, Empire engineer Dickie, kind of basically the same thing. Easier to say.
What about the Grail Pilgrim Dickie?
Grail Pilgrim
That's not
Dickie.
bad.
No,
that's not bad.
No, not into it.
Doesn't sing.
Was it Sorcerer Prophet Dickie? Because he's also a bit of a tech priest, because he's like a sorcerer and he like makes the machines go.
No, that's true. Yeah, that kind of works.
Hireling Wizard
Dickie.
Yeah, we're doing it live, people. If you didn't notice, we're think tanking it. We're definitely going to make the content better for people.
We'll figure it out.
Anyway, 2-part podcast. Second part to this week is going to be talking about some of the consternation out there in the hobby world. People happy, loving, or not happy, not loving their journeys into the old world so far. How to get the most out of your games, how to focus on the things that are important and make sure you're not taking this a bit too seriously too early. And if you are, what to do about it. So hopefully you'll join us over there. That can be found over at Patreon at That Old World Charm. We're also, if we're also on the line for sponsors, by the way. And right now we're lovingly being supported by Goonhammer, which we're very grateful for there. But Falcon also has, most of his nose and or 2 feet through that door. So we're very grateful for that support. Are there any posts going up there recently? Have you had any awesome posts on Goonhammer recently? I think you had a Linehammer one that you were not directly involved with, but it was an interesting read anyway.
Yeah, so there was a Linehammer that got a lot of people real shook up and angry.
Shook up, yeah.
I aided a little bit in the background, so my name got put on it, but I didn't provide any of the words. I expect you'll see a Linehammer rebuttal in the near future, written by me, covering some of the stuff that we didn't talk about the first time through. I just submitted and got posted reviews for the Chaos Demons and for Lizardmen. Lizardmen went up the day of our recording. And they've been kind of fire. A lot of people reading and providing commentary on their feelings on the book. So really loving seeing the motivation and people getting excited even about legacy armies.
Yes.
And yeah, so it's pretty exciting stuff. It's a busy time. We also have a second Old World podcast that just started with some support from Goonhammer as well, run by Blake from Art of War.
Yeah, baby.
Old World Unbroken, and they have their first episode that just went up today, like a 30-minute discussion of the first game they've played and their initial thoughts on the rules. So can't wait to see kind of what they put out themselves.
Man, it's been so amazing to see all the like 8th edition or 9th age or WAP alumni who migrated over to 40K just like come back within the first like month of the old world, just like and the ways recede straight back into the world that was. It's been really cool to see all us crunchy 40K heads just like we know where we live, we know where we're from. Anyway, let us jump into this review, the page you need to be on if you're going to be following along at home, because in Australia, we just got the books. So hopefully some Australians, some Aussies out there, some people maybe in New Zealand and stuff who just got their books now of 3 weeks after everybody else can be following along at home. We're starting at page 144. This is the combat phase. And the combat sequence is the first place we're going to start. And of course, it is pretty fair and easy to see how this goes. So we have done our strategy phase. We've executed some spells. We've gone into our movement phase. Charges were declared. Moves were executed. We're going to our remaining moves, etc., etc. We've also done our conveyance spells. Then we've gone into the shooting phase. We've done magic missiles, etc., etc. Shot people, cannon people, blah, 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 blah. Now into the combat phase sequence. And this kind of is the culmination of the turn. This is where all your work and kind of everything you set up in every other phase so far culminates into, did you execute or did you not execute your plan or your battle plan for that turn? So number 1, choose and fight a combat. Then second is calculate the combat result. Third, take the break tests wherever, after you've decided or figured out who has won via the combat result, take the break tests where needed, and then follow up and or pursuit. Those are the 4 stages of this sequence. Now, a lot has been said about the kind of, I guess, in relation to where things left off in 8th and sometimes 9th age and other ones, about the power spectrum of the turn. In that overwhelmingly it was what I guess you could say it was much more well distributed throughout the game previously, for better or worse, whereas like the combat phase, the shooting phase, and the fight and the magic phase all felt like they could destroy units, win games off their own bat. You could put enough into any of them that they could be the modus operandi of your army, and or 2 or 3 of them sometimes. And a lot more people are coming to, I think, the conclusion that the combat phase is not, feels like the be all and end all. I think that was first impressions, like only the combat phase matters. Everything else is just kind of setting up the combat phase. But I think that's kind of being eroded a little bit as time has gone on. People are starting to see the value in every phase of the game. But Peter, how does that statement resonate with you?
I still think it holds a good amount of water. I think that combat phase is that's where you're getting the majority of your points with a couple army exceptions. Like there's still a lot of import to the shooting phase and the magic phase. We discussed last week how the shooting phase is very important for dealing with chaff units, because they're going to be the things that often hamper your movement decisions, which completely impact how your combat phase is going to work out. So shooting definitely has some power there. Wood elves, lizard men, a couple other armies still have some pretty extensive shooting options, period. Magic, there are some magic builds that are very, very good, but for the most part, it does seem like most of the power for magic comes out of enhancements and hexes that impact the fight phase and movement phase. So I think it is fair to say that, yes, the majority of the power in this game is in the fight phase, but every phase does have some import.
Dickie, what about yourself? What are your impressions?
I think the first time I saw it, it felt pretty nostalgic. It felt very similar to 8th edition with a couple just very important key features, right? So the no step up is a big thing for 8th edition, as well as the full front rank fights, which we've already talked about a million times. I'm sure you've seen online. And the other thing is the way the pushback system works, which I really enjoy, by the way, as well. So it felt relatively comfy, I guess is the right word for it.
Yep.
So yeah.
I would like to say, especially in 8th edition, the combats felt very binary. It was either you were fighting a super unit into a unit that you were just going to crush and just walk right over, or you were fighting into a unit that was going to have steadfast ad nauseum, and it kind of felt pointless. And so it always felt like either one side was horrifically winning or a la, congrats, did you roll the snakes, to stick in combat kind of deal, or you were just there in perpetuity and you were wondered why you bothered. This feels like it's a lot more of a win via 1,000 cuts in the combat phase. Like, it's not a be all end all. It's more like you will bounce off each other several times, and then a definitive victor will kind of become apparent, rather than I got the charge I needed to. I win, the game is over, which is kind of what I felt like the 8th edition paradigm looked like. It was about 3 turns of positioning and jousting for position. Then someone got off the combat that they needed to, and the game was crushed, and we all just kind of went home from there. Peter, do you feel like that holds water as well here? Like, this is more of a, you need to get in combats and grind them out to get your points, rather than just one big execution and we're done?
Yeah, for the most part, yes. Because of how break tests work now, where they're not binary win-lose, like there's shades of gray, it does feel like most combats are going to go the distance. They're going to last several rounds. You have to grind the guys out, with some exceptions. And I believe like if you've built your list properly and you're the one controlling the movement phase, those exceptions, if both players are competent, I should say, are pretty rare.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So off the cuff, Dickie, having played, you played quite a little bit of 8th edition. Even quite recently, you were getting quite deep into 8th edition. Do you find the change from 8th edition to the old world to be better, worse, or much of a muchness, or apples and oranges?
It actually feels pretty apples and oranges. Oddly, like it feels very different. I played Skaven, so yeah. for a lot of my game, it was just, hey, hit my cool block that is never going to go away, and sure, you're going to kill 15 models a turn. I don't care. So for me, it's got a lot of differences, especially playing Skaven in this edition. It's very different, but it really feels like the counter charge or the big punchy character is such a big deal having in the unit to really like mow down that front rank, and plus just to rack up. Then of course being able to outnumber so you get a true break as well is a big deal as well. So it kind of feels a bit different for me. I don't know. What do you think, Pete?
I think there are moments that are like that. I think the big thing for me, at least how I've played the game, is that it's a lot about setting up flanks. It's about positioning my anvil or anvil adjacent unit in such a way that it's going to take the brunt of my opponent's worst assaults if it needs to, and then I let my chaff kind of funnel everything where I need it to go. So far for me, at least, the majority of my games have felt very similar to 8th, other than like those like one-off battles where you got run over because your opponent put every buff on the sun on their unit, or they smacked you with a purple sun before the combat phase started, so you're half a unit short that you didn't expect to be, things like that, right? So those things are gone. I think the big thing for me, I'm finding, is smaller units I'm able to grind out longer with. Like, I'm able to get that one extra turn with a unit of 12 to 13 guys because of the step up and things like that coming into play, and that's letting me get more. Like, it's letting me plan out flank charges better, which is a little more exciting to me. And there's a little bit more of a battle there between, like, am I getting my flank off? Is he going to counter that? How's that going to play out? That's where my thinking is now going.
Excellent. I love that stuff. All right. Choosing and fighting a combat. So there is a sequence for the combat phase, and then there's a sequence for each fight therein. So, of course, choosing and determining who can fight. Any units that are in base contact with one or more enemy units eligible and are engaged in combat, and each individual engagement between 2 or more units is referred to as a combat. The active player chooses one of those combats to be resolved in full, referred to as fighting a round of combat. This is a process represented in all combats that will be fought. Who can fight? It's rare that every single model in a unit is able to fight, usually only models in the fighting rank or front rank, whilst the units behind them push forward, the models behind them push forward to take the place of the fallen. Any model that is in base contact with an enemy model can fight, even if the enemy model is in contact with a flank, rear, or even in the models only touching a corner, like they're in the corner cutting. The fighting rank is comprised of the front rank, and then you can have supporting attacks, which are thus some models equipped with weapons that allow them to make supporting attacks, such as spears when you are charged. To make a supporting attack, a model must be directly behind a friendly model that is engaged itself in the fighting rank. However, supporting attacks cannot be made to a unit's flank, rear, nor can they be made by a unit that is itself in the fighting rank. What I found interesting here is that there's a big change in, I guess, the rules that forced maximization previously in the fight phase and the charge phase, where you would have to charge in such. If I was charging my opponent, I had to maximize to allow them to have the most attacks against me and me versus them, depending on our frontage, vice versa. Now it doesn't matter. Your whole front rank gets to fight regardless of how much of your front rank is engaged. But that is undercut by the fact that we used to always fight in 2, sometimes 3 ranks in horde formation. So the amount of attacks is down overall, but the ones that you do get are like so much more significant. Pete, what do you think about this system they've enabled so far?
It's definitely like this is a callback to previous older editions of the game. Like we didn't have this in 8th, but
it's 5th and 6th, yeah?
Yes, 5th and 6th edition had this. And it definitely changes things up. The one thing they didn't do from 6th is, I believe in 6th chart, if you charged, you had always strike first.
Yes.
Now it's just a bonus to your initiative based on how far you've moved. So there's a lot to play there with when you're making your list. Like, how do you pick what units are going to take weapons that give them always strike last? And like, what's your mix of units that have any kind of initiative whatsoever? And there's a lot of intrigue there as you're trying to set up, which guys are my anvils now? Like, which ones am I comfortable being my anvils because their initiative is either so high that it's great or it's so low that even if I get the charge off, it might not matter. Like there's a lot of interplay there.
This was a very jarring experience coming straight from, say, playing at the square-based GT, where I won the Big Mouth Billy Bass, everybody, to experiencing this system. It seems like very much night and day. Was it a shock to the system for you, Dickie?
Yeah, I think I had to go through this whole section multiple. This and the charge phase. Charge phase really got me. The last phase that we talked about. Charge phase got me like just I was like, wait a minute, let's just roll back. But this one, the supporting attacks got me because I was like, they have to be directly behind something that's fighting. This is way different for supporting attacks. So I think this is where the whole line hammer came in. And I've been testing dwarves. So anytime I did the math on dwarves charging, which is not easy, by the way, they have a charge potential of 9 inches.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to be taking charges. So literally everyone I have has a great weapon. There's no point not to have a great weapon because I'm going to punch you because I'm going to get punched first. And it was a bit jarring. I was like, okay, this is kind of the game. You kind of can see how the game will play on the table through this phase for sure.
All right. How many attacks? When a model is fighting in combat, it makes a number of attacks. How many attacks is determined by its attack characteristic and its proximity to the enemy. If a model is in base contact with an enemy model, it makes a number of attacks equal to its attack characteristic. If a model is able to fight but is not in base contact with an enemy, it can only make 1 attack regardless of its attack characteristic. A la, if you're making a supporting attack, if you're eligible to, you only ever make 1 attack. Vastly reduced from the 3 attacks an ogre used to get in a second rank or monstrous infantry. But who strikes first? Peter, you want to take it away?
Sure. So who strikes first is purely based on your model's initiative in a unit, and it determines when it attacks. You go through the initiative values in a combat from 10 all the way down to 1. 10 being the highest you can possibly get. If you perform a charge, then the models in your unit that have charged, or your enemy's units, they get +1 to their initiative for every inch they moved on that charge, up to a maximum of 3 if it's in the front. And if you manage to get a flank or a rear charge, you can get up to a +4 on that initiative, which is huge. There's also disordered charges in the game, which can happen based on a number of different factors. Usually low linear obstacles or spells can cause disordered charges, although also you can get disordered if you have to declare a charge against 1 unit, but you have to end up in combat with 2 units. Or if you can't close the door. There's lots of different ways to get disordered, but then you don't get any kind of initiative bonus whatsoever.
Do you think Dickie would play the keyboard in our band Low Linear Obstacle?
I believe, I believe as a skink priest.
I'm the keyboard guy.
Yeah, as a mustache, mate, the keyboard.
As a skink priest, I think you have to play the keyboard or keytar.
Oh, yes. I'm down with the keytar for sure.
Keytar, I think keytar. Keytar's a little bit more respectable.
It's a little more 80s too. Yeah. I get that one. Yeah.
All right. A way of thinking about this that I've used to explain to people in the past is that as soon as me as the active player, or it's my turn, I select a combat to commence, a stack kind of self-populates in my head. And you can run through this. The stack kind of concept is something that has been taken from card games, mostly Magic the Gathering. That as soon as you select the combat to take place, immediately kind of a list of operations self-populates in order of initiative. And between each activation, there goes, a couple of clauses being like, Are they still in base contact? Are they making supporting attack? And what? And that is via the initiative step of the units as soon as that thing's activated. So of course it would go to highest initiative and or unit that charge, etc., then all the way down until you got your always strikes last units. And when you think about it like that, it becomes quite easy to, over time, just realize when and who gets to fight and when and in what order. It becomes pretty easy. But I like thinking about it like it's a stack. Simultaneous combats, if both models on the sides of a combat have the same initiative value after modifiers, they will attack at the same time. To simplify, the active player should resolve their attacks first, followed by their opponent. So they even denote that the active player should just attack first, because sometimes it's like, you can go, I'm a good bloke. Nah, shut up, active player. Casualties caused by the active player during simultaneous combat do not reduce the number of attacks you make in opposition. All right, Dickie, this is the big stuff coming up next. We can't all fight. Read that out for us verbatim and tell us what you think.
Oh, not every model can fight, Adam. I don't know if you knew that. Many will be removed as casualties before they have a chance. So there's two factors here. So fallen warriors. If a model is in the fighting rank is slain by an enemy with higher initiative characteristic before it has made its attacks, it cannot fight, and its attacks are lost. What a big deal.
Oof.
Stepping forward, a model cannot fight during the phase in which it stepped forward to the fighting rank, regardless of its initiative.
This caused me so many headaches when I first read it. I was like, what? Does that mean that the champions just kind of auto died if I take if I'm 5 frontage and lose 5 guys? Does that mean I just lose my command? I'm never going to buy full command in this edition. It's no point. It doesn't do anything, especially if I've got a low, initiative. Elves are broken. They have no all these things. All these things happened immediately in like the 5 minutes after I read this rule. But Peter, is it that big a deal? Is it a good rule as well?
I mean, it is a big deal. It does make initiative and being able to manipulate initiative or your number of attacks like very, very important in this edition, more important than ever. But your command always replaces itself with the exception of the champion, and the champion cannot be targeted unless your opponent specifically says they're targeting your champion. So in an instance where your whole front rank has been killed, if your opponent never stated that they were putting attacks into the champion, or there was a way for the champion to escape death, he will always still get his attacks or her attacks. Any characters in the front rank of the unit will get their attacks as well, unless attacks are specifically applied to those models. In the case of your musician or your banner, it states later on, if they drop it, the next guy just picks it up and they keep moseying on. Something else to note about this is the way it's worded, is where it says that models that stepped into the fighting rank do not get to attack. If you have a unit with supporting attacks, you would still get supporting attacks as long as you have a second rank still left in the unit, because they didn't. So the guys that were in that second rank moved to the front, but the guys in the third rank moved to the second. They didn't move into the fighting rank. So they can still make their supporting attacks. They can
make their stabby stabs over the top.
Keep that in mind. It is I know for some people it's a rather gray thing, but that's like, if you're going to go by rules as written, this is what it is. So the guys in the second row, they had to step over all those dead bodies, and they're like, I don't like this. That's how it's worded as to why they can't do it. But the guys in the third row, they haven't seen anybody dead yet. Line of sight rules, guys. They can't see it. So they're just like, everything's gravy. I got point issues. I can apply a sharp end to soft object and get along with my day. So
Dave picked up the keytar. The other guy picked up that tattered banner. No big deal.
They're like throwing up on the ground. They're like, this is the worst. I'm so sick. Meanwhile, Johnny in the way in the back was like, oh, this is my chance.
It's my chance to
find for Johnny. Johnny, man of arms of Britannia, to show his quality. Little Johnny. Anyway, multiple units in combat. A unit find itself fighting multiple enemies at the same time, sometimes even being engaged by enemies in different arcs. In such cases, the models within that unit may have to divide their attacks. So this is pretty much denoting that if you are charged in the front and in the side, or in the back, in the front, or in the front by 2 units, and you're playing, Linehammer, Unga Bunga frontage, you will have a little bit more terms and conditions to jump through. If a model in base contact with one or more enemy models, it can choose which one to attack. If a model has more than one attack, it can divide its attacks. This must be made clear before rolling to hit. Now, I do like that clarification, because for a while we were like, if I'm hitting the front and in the side, and I'm the corner model, and I'm a champion, I'm a character, I've got 10. Was it Hellebron? And I've got 10 freaking attacks at strength 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
Can I go 5 and 5 or 3 and 2 or 1, 1 and 9 or whatever? Yes, you absolutely can. In a fighting rank, if a fighting rank is engaged with one or more enemy units, as shown in the figures below, because they've actually done some pretty cool dioramas for us or images, models in that rank must, if possible, direct their attacks against the enemy models they are in base contact with. So that's denoting that if you have two, if you are, you're playing Linehammer and you're 20 long and 2 units have hit you in the front, you don't get to boot all 20 models onto one of those units. You have to fight the ones you're in base contact with if you're in base contact with them. A model that is not in base contact with an enemy may direct its attacks against the closest enemy unit. If 2 enemy units are equally close, the player can choose which one the model attacks. And fighting on multiple fronts is pretty straightforward. If you are based by engagement, engaged by a unit you get to attack, you can only ever fight in one rank, even if you do have supporting attacks in the side or the rear. That's correct, yeah, guys?
Yes, you do not get extra ranks in the side or rear unless you are a unit that has martial prowess, which is a special rule that lets you do that.
Now, this is the dividing attacks thing. This is something that we brought up in our part 2 last week when we were talking about the Linehammer. Yeah. It was one of the big talking points in the community, which is, it's another reason you guys should join us on part 2, because we do talk about the hot topics in the community over there. But the fact is that, if someone was 30 long, and I genuinely think people talking about Linehammer-esque archetypes being that long, I think that is a mistake. I think, in all honesty, like a 10 to 15, when it is the right matchup at the right time, might be something we end up seeing and adopted into the game. But it will have this drawback. Peter, what am I denoting?
You're referring just this dividing attack situation where you get multi-charged by many units?
Exactly right. I'm just going to slam one medium-sized good fighter unit into the middle and then a bunch of chaff nonsense down the line. And most of your units have to attack my chaff nonsense. So therefore, I'm negating the actual bonuses of you being in a line with a unit that has, 2 or 3 attacks each.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also the benefits of if you are the one getting off the charge, which often you're going to be because of terrain and other situations making charges unwieldy for the very long lines, like you're often going to have the initiative bonus. So you're going to be attacking first. They have to pull from the ends of the unit. So those chaff guys on the sides often don't get punched back very hard at all, because those are the models that are going to be pulled. But if those chaff units have close order, for example, you stack your close order combat resolution when we go over combat res later. And that, like, all these things kind of rack up against you in those situations. And that's one of the negatives of the very long kind of Linehammer situation, where we've seen people discussing, like, what if I go 60 wide with Chaos Warriors or 70 wide with, Dwarven Rangers with great weapons or something like that. Anyway.
Dickie, have you had experience on the table with these kind of interactions?
With the big line?
Yeah.
I did put a 15 wide ranger unit with great weapons and crossbows. It seemed to work well. The ballistic skill shooting was fine. Being able to scout was really nice with the rangers. So it seemed to work, but I think there is an amount of models that you want to put on the front rank. I don't think you want to do 70 wide or anything, for sure.
Yeah, I think there is a point of this thing has some good points to it. And this could end up being a legitimate strategy in some matchups, in some units. But it just being like the game-breaking way to play with, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, is just absolute hyperbole.
Yeah.
Anyway, next 2 pages denote how to hit, how to wound, and make armor saves and stuff. We did that last week. Please refer to our it's exactly the same as the shooting phase.
There's some slight changes for to hit, but to wound is the same.
Don't waste our time. Yeah, sure, go for it. Tell us about those.
Okay, so... And this is the most complicated part. So ballistic skill to hit, people think that's complicated. It's not, guys. Get over yourselves. There's just a chart. You look at the chart and you say, how many minuses am I taking? You say them out loud like you're some kind of, foolish being so that your opponent understands, and then you roll your dice. Weapon skill to hit's a little bit different. So weapon skill to hit, if your weapon skills match, it's always a 4+.
Yes.
If your opponent's weapon skill is higher than yours, but not more than double, then you hit on 4s.
But they hit you on 3s.
And And then if your opponent's weapon skill is more than double, so for an example, if your weapon skill 1 and your opponent's is a 3, you will hit them on 5s. In the reverse, if your weapon skill is the same, as I've already said, 4s. If your opponent's weapon skill is less than yours, you hit them on 3s. If you more than double your opponent's weapon skill, you hit them on 2s. So if I have weapon skill 5 and my opponent has weapon skill 2, because that's double -1 in the situation, or half -1, I should say, then you're going to be hitting them on 2s. They're hitting you on 5s. And that's kind of the chart. You can force your opponent to hit as badly as 5s, and you can hit as well as 2s.
Correct. And I would like to say, unlike shooting, there's no way on the chart to make someone hit on a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 9 like there is in shooting. And that is pretty much to note that if anything had to hit on 6s, it would just be a unit you couldn't play.
But to be like, there are rules. Rolls of natural 1 always miss.
Correct.
And rolls of natural 6 in close combat always hit, regardless of any buffs or debuffs.
Yeah. So if you were hitting on 5s naturally, and that you have a -1 to hit and a -1 weapon skill, whatever, you would still be hitting on 6s. Doesn't matter, because hitting on 7s in combat just makes for a bad game, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, if you have like a Source Old Blood that's got like the aura of Quetzal and a glittering helm or bedazzling helm, whatever it's called now on.
Just making up words. He's just making up words, people.
That's 2 magic armor pieces you can put on to be -2 to hit in combat. It's really kind of cute. You can still be hit on 6s, so don't do it.
I just heard gibberish then. Yeah, no, that made sense. Removing casualties. Each unsaved wound applied to the target unit, causing 1 wound to be lost, as described on page 102. When a model is reduced to 0 wounds, it becomes a casualty and is removed from play. This continues until there are no more unsaved wounds to be applied from your unsaved pool. Stepping forward and closing in. In combat, casualties are removed from the back rank of their units as normal, even though this is to represent them being removed from the front rank. This represents the members of the rear rank stepping forward to fill the gaps whilst models remaining in the fighting ranks close in. This has been mechanically and logistically on the table, as in we are playing with miniatures and models, one of the most frustrating and confusing things for people trying to get into this game or get up to date with. Yeah, people just being like, so they're dead from the front, but I'm moving from the back. But now I haven't. Exactly, but now I haven't removed them from the front. So how many died from the front, but I just put them in a pile over there? So how many were actually dead from the front and the thing? And how many attacks do I get now? And do they support? Do they not support? Who stepped up? Who's a musician now? Is this guy a standard bearer? Bobby, have you got the standard? No, Johnny's got the standard. Oh, Bobby, you get the bagpipes. And people in their brains, and there's a lot of people playing our game on different levels of experience with rank and flanks. I find this personally really annoying. Like I have to remove from the back, but they're actually from the front. I'd rather them just make a system that makes it not stupid. But here we are. They've also told you, like I just said, you set your casualties aside, guys. Yeah. This is just a tip for the game. Don't put your casualties away as soon as you've done it. As soon as they're dead, put them to the side, because you're going to need them to figure out who won that combat and who has to take their tests and stuff at the end. Peter, what I just described is something that I know people have found frustrating, as in like conceptually, it not only does it break a little bit of immersion, but it just makes it logistically silly at times, being like, well, I've taken this many guys away. So is it this guy and this guy, or is it that guy and that guy? And how do I like min-max this? And how do I not do this stupidly or whatever? Is this a big deal at all?
No, it's not a big deal.
Fabulous.
Just put the models beside the thing, or use a die, put a die beside it and count it up as you lose guys. If you are like very anal about putting your models away as soon as they die, just so that you have your tracker, and that way this helps you with combat res, which we're going to get into later, but it also helps you with like, okay, so I have 8 guys in my front rank. I lost 6 guys. Only the 2 of these guys are going to be able to attack
the champion. Yeah.
No, not plus the champion in that situation, but like in a situation where you only have say 5 wide and you lose 8 guys. Well, he didn't target my champion. At least my champion's going to get his attacks in.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah, and it can very well be that it's just like a champion. So a lot of champions get to have magic ability, like get to have magic armor and get upgrades now. And I'm actually looking at that out of the corner of my eye more and more, being like, people are going to want to try and target this guy, but you can't put a lot of attacks on him usually because of how many get to attack, or do you try and put too many on him, then you don't kill enough rank and file, and then I win a combat because you overkilled a single champion. Is this a mechanic that's actually, so just taking a little bit of a tangent, Dickie, is this something that you're looking at as well as like, well, if I make my champion just really killy and or more survivable than he should be, I can really just mess with people's allocations?
Nah, I think it's cute, but I think I opt for more things than making things better. Skaven in me, but yeah.
I guess I'm coming at it from an ogre player, where if I put 25 points of upgrades on a man-eater, that guy is literally like someone else's general. Yeah. So there is that. Peter, what do you think?
I mean, I'm It's kind of 50-50 for me. It depends on the unit. Like if I already have a decent base armor save, maybe I'll throw an invuln on them if I have the extra points, especially with armies that have like really cheap options to do that. Like high elves have Seed of Rebirth, which is a common magic item that gives for 20 points, it gives you a 5-up regeneration save. That's something I have definitely looked at when I have kind of scanned side eye high elves, being like, I would just put that on so many champions in my army and live that life. Because it's such an easy thing to do to keep that one guy alive from those kind of shenanigans. Because generally, if you're playing into a pretty good player, one of the first things they're going to do, because champions don't auto die, is they're going to target them unless you're forcing them into a challenge. Like that's something I do whenever I get into combat. It's like, okay, these attacks are going into your champion. Et cetera, et cetera. With the exception of generally if I'm playing into like ogres, because they have so many wounds anyway, I don't really care. But yes, like, so yeah, I have looked at it. As a Lizardman player, a Temple Guard are really the only ones that kind of give me any reason to want to do it. And I haven't done it yet. I don't know if I will, but I've thought about it for sure.
Well, that's actually perfectly said for the multi-wound stuff, because this is how I think about it from an ogres player, and another reason why I think it's incentivized. So when you have, like, let's say a great sword, let's say a halberdier sergeant. That guy has 2 attacks. The rest of the models in the unit have 1 attack. So that guy is twice as good as any other model in the unit. Whereas an ogre champion has 1 more attack, usually going from 3 to 4. An ogre bull unit, it's only 25% or whatever percent better. It's not twice as good. And so removing regular rank and file is just as good, if not better, because you're doing just fine. You don't need to allocate attacks or risk going in and under killing a single model. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. Is pretty much where I was going with that. All right, calculating combat res. Dickie, how does this work?
Oh. Okay. Oh, yeah, I love this. This is great. So once every model engaged in combat has fought, you can determine which side has won the round of combat. If one side is completely wiped out and the other side is automatically the winner, obviously, because they beat them into a pulp, regardless of the rules that follow. Combat result score. To determine the combat result score, consult this table below and calculate how many combat result points. Is that really what we're going to call it, game? Combat result points. Anywho, your unit scored. So the first one is unsaved inflicted. So you get 1 point for each. So if you killed 10 guys and they all have 1 wound each, get 1. A rank bonus, you get +1 per rank. I guess in most cases it's just going to be 1. Standard, you get 1. Battle standard, you get another 1. If you were in the flank, you get +1, or if the rear, +2. If you had high ground, or back in the day, it was charged into high ground or from high ground.
Charged, but Donahoe. Yep.
You get +1. Overkill. So this is in a challenge. If you overkilled the thing you were in challenge with, you get +1 for excess wounds and other bonuses as applicable.
This is pretty much the same as it's always been, right? Is there any here that, apart from the high ground one, which used to be you have to charge down a hill, this is all pretty much exactly the same as we've always ever had it, yeah?
It's just the ranks, I think, that were...
Yeah.
That's the change, right?
You used to have up to 5 for a rank bonus, and now I think it's capped at 3.
It's up to 3 back in the day, right? You can have... It
was 3 back in the day for everybody. And now it's capped at... generally 2 for most units, and then 3 if you're in flank or rear, if you have the horde keyword, you get an extra rank that you can claim. And then some other units you can only claim 1 extra rank, etc.
Yeah, it is weird here that they do not denote what I think has become the most important one, which is closed order. Closed order isn't even mentioned here unless it's in the others. The main special rules.
That's applicable, I guess.
Yeah. Example, a closed order formation. And I have found that to be the most frequent one. It's become the new standard. Like, okay, you got your standards, you got your order, and then you got your ranks, then you got your kills, then you got your, whatever. But all this happens, like I said, like on the stack. Last thing you do once you get through all the activations of people who could possibly attack is you go to the resolve who won the combat. And then you tally up, like we said, how many kills, how many other bonuses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have done that, you move on to break tests. Peter, take it away. How does this work?
So break tests, after you have figured out your combat resolution, you've looked at your opponent and you said you scored an 11, I scored a 9. So I am at a -2 for my break test. What you're going to do is you're going to roll 2d6 and you're going to compare that to your leadership. So let's say you are leadership 9, or your general, which has leadership 9, is within 12 or 18 inches of your unit. You roll and you get a 7. You're going to say, okay, so this is lower than my leadership. Is it lower than my modified leadership? And your modified leadership is that combat result differential, which in this case we'll say is 2. So 9 minus 2 is 7. If I get a 7 or lower, then X happens. If I get 7 to 9, or an 8 or a 9, something else happens. If I get higher than 9, the bad happens. That 7 or lower, it's called give ground. So in this situation, you have rolled lower than your modified leadership based on that difference in combat result. Or you roll double 1s, which is always a give ground reaction, no matter what happened in that combat. You take your unit and you push them back 2 inches. And then your opponent may choose to follow up and tag them again, or stay where it is. If you rolled less than your leadership, but more than that modified combat result leadership, so if in this situation you rolled an 8 or a 9, you now fall back in good order. And so in this situation, you roll 2d6, and that is how many inches you pivot directly away from the center of your opponent's unit and run from. At which point they have the option to pursue you. When you run, though, at the end of that movement, you immediately rally. So you whip around 180 degrees, and that is now where you are. It's key to note here that it's from the center of your opponent's unit, so it isn't always directly away. It's not 180 degrees. There's the potential, based on how you guys have hit each other in close combat, that you could end up at like a weird angle where you turn 45 degrees before you flee, or even almost 90, depending on how long a line you're running and your opponent is running, and where models ended up getting pulled, etc. So it is something to remember. Most of the time, it's just going to be a flip 180. Yeah, but you can have some one-offs. Finally, if you rolled higher than your leadership, you fully break, and in a full break, you turn. You flee that 2d6 inches, you do not auto rally. And in that situation, if your opponent chooses to pursue you and they roll higher than you, or they catch you when you physically measure the distances you both move, then your models are dead. In the previous example, you just start fighting again. It should also be noted that if your opponent has double your unit strength, when you're doing this combat result situation, you can fall back in good order is not an option. You can only give ground or break.
Yep. So there is a lot going on here. And this is one of the biggest things that they've done to bring, I guess, granularity into what was a binary system previously. Is this a good change for the game, Dickie? And is this, give us, if you can, a little bit of a TLDR on your little Dickie's Tactica on, do you follow up, do you press your advantage, or do you try and break off and do other things?
Dickie always follows up.
That's it, baby.
Name of the game. This is a great addition to the game. I really enjoy this anyway. It adds so much more push and pull to the combat phase, and it's a lot of fun. It's hard to wrap your mind around coming from the older systems to the new system, so it does take a bit of time to kind of get into your little noodle. But no, I really like this. I think this is a lot of fun.
Fantastic. What about yourself, Peter? What do you think?
Yeah, it's the same. I think it's great. It's definitely changes how you think about combat, just by the fact that it's no longer like a binary thing that can possibly happen.
Yep. I love the way that they've done this. The give ground and the fullback in good order. Like, you can push people out of aura ranges. You can push people out of like BSB ranges. You can, manipulate their ability to come and support you via flank charges because you pushed them back X amount of inches, and you can just start. It adds another depth of tactical generalship. It adds another layer to the complexity of the game. Whereas it used to just be, cool, I chaffed you. Did you engage with the chaff or not? Doesn't matter. I still get to charge you with my super unit. I break through, cool, I reform, and now I'm in your flank and whatnot. And now it is like, I have to plan to be in combat with you for 2 or 3 turns, and then I need to try and execute on any advantages that I gain during that, or disadvantages, and try and manage them, and or do it. It's cool. It's freaking cool. I like it a lot. I think it's a great addition to the game. What I don't love is the I wonder if there was a more elegant way to figure out the break tests. because while once you start playing the game, it does become quite intuitive. Explaining it to new players, which is something I've had to do a lot of. I've had quite a few 40k players asking me to get into it, and I've been in Discord chats and trying to explain it to them, like, on the winter solstice when Saturn is in ascendance, you will only break on a double six. That kind of stuff. But once you start playing the game, it does become a lot more intuitive. But is that something you've run into as well, Peter? Do you have a great way of explaining it apart from what you've?
I have a terrible way of explaining it. I just did awfully. And I know I did because like my brain was starting to wander as I was saying the words. My brain was like, you're doing it wrong. And I just twisted and went with it. I thought like in person, because I've done it enough now, it's a little easier. It's also a little easier if you've played like Warhammer Fantasy Battle or other rank and flank games that use combat results to just add like, before, if you rolled higher than this modified leadership, you were screwed. Now you're not. And now you just have to roll under that leadership, except in these certain circumstances, and we'll get to them if they happen, type of thing. So that's generally how I've been doing it from when I've been teaching people, because I've been doing a lot of teaching games. So there's situations where I'll just kind of briefly explain it as best I can. And then sometimes my opponent will be like, okay, this 5-man unit, they're going to charge that guy. And I'll be like, okay, so here's the deal. Are you sure you're going to do anything to me? Because otherwise I'm more than double you. So you don't get the option to fall back in good order anymore. Yeah. And then they'll be like, okay, maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I won't. But it's these extra little additives that kind of flub with the explanations, I find, more than anything. So
I think it's important to know. So the big difference in this phase that I noticed from 8th edition was you have to physically touch. So if you're chasing down a unit, you actually physically have to touch to destroy that unit. Back in the day, you just had to beat the roll. That was it. So this was a big change for me, because there is some weird shenanigans with pivoting that 90 and running through a unit so the other unit can't physically touch you. So there's a lot of shenanigans with that you can do.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go bit.
I was just going to say, when I said like you can cause some weird scenarios before, like we watched a game with our good friend Val Heffelfinger and Danny Sweetmake McDevitt, and there was a situation where it was basically like one really long line of models gets hit by a unit of witch elves that are passing parallel to a forest. So because they're passing parallel to the forest, they only hit one side of the unit. When you pull from either side, it kind of leaves them off center. So this unit of Black Orcs ends off center from the witch elves, which, none of the descriptions in the book play out or explain. But because they're off center, when you look at those two center models and you say, okay, you have to pivot directly away from my center guy, it's no longer a 180 degree turn and run. It's now they're turning more like 85 degrees. And so now they've created like a 3 or 4 inch separation, depending on how long that model was to begin with. And then you have to pivot to match if you're going to follow through or if you're going to pursue. And you like now there's a 3 or 4 inch gap there that wasn't there before. Yeah. And it's probably confusing some people just listening to this. Just understand that geometry exists and it's fucked up.
Well, that's your one.
That's my one. Yes, sir. That's my one. If I say another bad word, I do have to put the check mark in on Apple Podcasts.
It does.
And we become an explicit podcast going forward.
I beeped it last time. It was fine.
Thank you, Dickie. Thank you so much.
We need to get a fun bleep soundbite to use. Because I
just use the standard beep that you hear.
It's just me saying fuck is what we used to beep.
Let's do.
You're going to bleep that.
I'll put the check mark in.
I'm going to use the C bomb.
I'm going to beep it.
It's in my constitution in Australia that I do get to use the C bombs. It is part of our.
Yep. I read it in the podcast agreements too.
Yeah, it was when you guys signed on.
We signed it. Wait, we signed something?
Well, you did.
You did.
Weird.
Yeah, you did.
That's why you're getting $30 an episode, baby.
All right. Follow-up and pursuit, which we have for the most part already explained. It's easier to explain it whilst you're explaining the break test stuff than it is to go about through that and then go through this. It all makes quite suffice to say, if they do anything bar break, you have the option to follow up and continue the combat if you so wish. And then if they do break and run, you have the opportunity to run them down. Of course, we've just denoted that you have to make contact with the unit in order to run them down. If you do, they are absolutely deaded in the ground, take them off the table, as they have been in numerous other versions of rank and flank games. Pursuing into a fresh enemy, pursuing into an obstacle are things we do need to cover, though. Units making a pursuit. Yes.
Sorry, Adam. The one thing we should mention, because we did talk a little bit about following up and pursuing. There is always the option if a unit falls back in good order or flees breaks and flees to restrain and reform, which I didn't talk about. If you do
Yes.
break a unit in one of those two ways, not with the give ground option, but the other two, you can choose. You have to roll a leadership test to see if you don't follow through. So if you say, I don't want to follow up, and your opponent is running away, those juices are flowing. You got all that adrenaline in your body or chaos blood or whatever has happened to you. So you have to roll a leadership test. If you pass that leadership test, then yes, you can stop and you can reform however you like. If you fail, you do still have to pursue.
This was kind of the stuff I was getting at with Dickie, a little bit of tactica on when you would want to pursuit or not pursuit. But you ever give a little TLDR on your thoughts on it?
When to pursue or not to pursue? It really depends on like what your opponent's you think your opponent's next moves are going to be, or in the case of an opponent's turn, like what do you want to accomplish next? So in some situations, you'll have destroyed a unit enough that they're not going to be a threat anymore, and you're going to get points for them anyway. And so you're okay if they successfully rally, or you're in a situation where they need double ones to rally. It's probably not going to happen if they're less than 25% of the unit remaining, or they're so close to the board edge, it's fine. In which case, yes, you want them to leave. You don't care. Your real plan now is to reform so that you can face a new enemy, or so you can start charging down a line, let's say. That's often when you're going to restrain. Also, if you wipe the enemy out completely. In previous editions, if you wiped out an enemy completely, you automatically got to restrain. You didn't have to roll for it, and now you do. That's the other reason why. So often when you've wiped out an enemy, you're desperately hoping you don't just keep running, unless you're afraid of getting hit with a flank charge or something. So
that was going to be my easiest one to explain. Was, let's say your opponent set you up for a flank charge, and the thing that's going to be flanking you is more deadly than the thing that was in front of you.
Yeah,
you have successfully managed by whatever to beat back that unit in front of you, and so you're much rather happy taking that unit in your flank in a turn or two's time than the one that was about to get you going into your opponent's next turn. And so you execute that restrain, you reform, and you face the new threat, the one that's going to be coming in immediately in the next turn. And of course, if you're going into your turn, then you have all the choices, and why not wait and see a couple of other things, work out, whether you get off your buffs and debuffs before you execute and you want to go back into that charge. Because you can't always just be like, well, I'm going to restrain, see if I get my buffs off, and then decide if I'm going back in again, which I think is a perfectly valid option. Also, pursuing into an obstacle, like I said, units making a pursuit move are affected as terrain by normal. A pursuing unit must stop moving if it makes contact with a friendly unit or with impassable terrain. Usually that would be, if you came within an inch, you would bounce off a friendly unit. But now I think you just stop, like, literally in kissing distance. Pursuit off the battlefield. Should any part of a pursuing unit move into contact with or cross beyond the edge of the battlefield, it is removed from play but not destroyed. The unit returns to the battlefield during its controller's player's next compulsory move subphase, as if it were a unit arriving with reinforcement, and must be placed as close as possible to the point upon which it left. So usually you would leave a marker. Sometimes I would just leave the unit there, just turn it around and just leave it there. And maybe I'll put a marker there, saying that, can't do anything with it this turn. Next turn, we are good to go. Pursuing into a fresh enemy, which is one of the most exciting and, oh my God, I am a god of this game, things you can ever do. Pursuing units will often make contact with an enemy unit other than the one that they were pursuing. In such case, the pursuing unit counts as having charged the enemy unit and will make contact with it, wheeling to maximize contact if required and wheeling to align as normal. The unit so a unit that was being pursued is not caught. Now, pursuing into a new combat. Pursuing into a fleeing enemy is exactly what you think. That they are run down exactly as if they were, you were pursuing them in the first place. Like if you pursue into one unit that was running from a previous combat, you can run them down just the same. Into a new combat, this is the gold standard for I am winning this game by my sheer brain power alone. Yeah. If a pursuing unit makes contact with an enemy unit that is not fleeing, the units become engaged in combat. If the enemy unit was engaged in combat at the start of the phase, and if that combat has not yet been fought, the pursuing unit will fight again when the combat is fought and counts as having charged. However, it cannot pursue again this turn. Instead, it will automatically restrain and reform. Otherwise, units becoming locked in combat until the next player's turn, when they will fight a round of normal combat like they did. But Dickie, you're making a lot of noises. Is this one of the parts of the game that gets you aroused as much as it does me? Anytime if you execute this,
if you could do this, you just literally like throw your hands up the air and you go, this is it. I won. Like there's no coming back. This is
the peak of gaming.
Yeah. Fresh, like chef's kiss, like get the hell out of here. I'm attacking you again. This is magical. Yeah, it's so good.
Peter, how do you go about engineering this occurring on the table? Like, how can we give new players an indication of how to stitch one of these together or avoid having it done to them?
The big trick to not having this happen to you is do your goddamn best not to be parallel to each other. Don't have two units like side by side, because this is when it's going to happen. One unit's going to get charged in the flank, the other one's going to get charged in the front, and then your opponent's just going to be like, flanks going first, baby. Wipeout, overrun, Bob's your uncle. It's kind of like the most common way, especially in like a mid to late game scenario. I've played a lot of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, so I've done this a couple of times. The one time that sticks in my head, I was playing against a high elf player who was really cocky with my Saurus Warriors. I had a unit of Saurus Warriors hit a unit of Phoenix Guard that he had purposely given me his flank on because he was planning on doing some really stupid thing. And it was so stupid because I did kill them and overran into a unit of White Lions that was in combat with another unit of my guys, and that he was adamant was just going to wreck everything. But because of that, I killed, 25 Phoenix Guard and 25 White Lions in the same round. Basically won me a game against a guy that was adamant that the game was his. So yeah, please don't. If you have any way to not parallel your units so this shit happens, do your best not to. Like plan ahead, baby. If you're going to do it to your opponent, just hem them in. If you have a way to hem your opponent in so they don't get to choose when they want to move, this is how you'll set up for yourself. So
the other way I've found doing it is make sure your chaff is a sufficient a number of inches away from the unit you don't want to get charged. Because what I've done in the past is I charge I'm chaffing you and you're chaffing me. We're both chaffing each other. Right. I charge your chaff, and your chaff is so close that you have to hold, because if you don't, I can just redirect into the unit you were trying to stop me getting into anyway. But then I charge my chaff into the unit I actually wanted to fight. So my unit, and for this example, unit of Mournfang charges into your unit of Pistoliers or whatever, kills the Pistoliers, rolls a big enough overrun, which I think in the example I'm thinking of, I needed to roll a 10, and I did. And I made it, and I charged the Sabertusk into the Halberdiers behind. And so then the Sabertusk hasn't fought yet, and the Mournfang just made it into the Halberdiers, the Sabertusk task. And so, cool, we all get to go again. And I went straight on through both units. So make sure you have sufficient distance between both your chaffing units, your misdirecting units, and the units you want to protect anyway. You can't have them, within 8, inches of each other is kind of my rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right? 8 inches?
Yeah.
I feel like that's generally safe. 7 inches is your average roll on a pursuit.
Exactly right.
So 8, you're playing like for me, I probably try to make it 9 or 10, but 8 is like you have a better than 50% shot that nothing bad's going to happen to you. So.
Okay. Oddball stuff. So this is the last kind of bits of the combat phase. Of course, assailment spells happen in the combat phase, and has been denoted in a couple of different places, which I did know, but we funnily enough didn't kind of highlight enough because we were pretty delusional by the time we were doing actually reading out the assailment spells, because it was like in the second hour of the show or whatever. But you do cast assailment spells in both your turn and your opponent's turn. In both of them, you do pop them off in both. So when you do look at a lot of those, when you look at assailment spells, none of them look especially deadly. And I think it's probably because if any of them was like at the same level as like Fireball or Doombolt, we'd be like, oh my god, let's smash that off both every turn, that's going to win me combats. So they're all pretty mediocre, but anything that is actually truly like medium okay as an assailment spell might be relatively good if you're playing a very combat heavy army. And I think that's what to need to take into place here. Dickie, anything on this page jumping out at you or something we need to tell people about? So we've got shrinking units, no more foes, incomplete ranks, which is kind of interesting. Split profiles, different weapons. Different weapons is exactly what you think. You just, if they are the same initiative, you just roll different piles of, you just fast roll the different ones together. Yeah. Pretty easy. And if they're not at the same initiative, it's not a problem at all. Just roll them when the initiative comes up in the stack.
Characteristics of 0 is pretty interesting. It scares me when I read this. So some models have a weapon skill attacks characteristic of 0 will find themselves at the mercy of the enemy with a weapon skill of 0. So they just like stand there and they just look at you kind of with a dumb face. So they can't do anything and they just get hit, which is really fun. They're automatically hit. So they're jumping in front of the sword in order to get hit. So that was pretty interesting. All
right. Petey baby, sugar, baby, honey. Tell us about terrain and combat.
Terrain and combat. So we've talked about terrain quite a bit when it came to shooting and magic. Terrain is equally important when it comes to close combat for a number of reasons. First off, open ground and hills. If you're on open ground, nothing happens. There's no change to anything. Hills, though, as already mentioned, if you are on a hill and your opponent is not on a hill when you're in close combat, or per the latest FAQ, if you're just higher up on the hill, in which case closer to the middle of the hill, as they say it,
King of the hill,
you have the high ground. So you are Ewan McGregor in this circumstance, and you will get a +1 to your combat resolution. Difficult terrain. If at least 25% of the models in your unit are in difficult terrain, they will lose their rank bonuses. So anything that benefits from rank bonus, they lose that because they're considered disrupted. This doesn't apply to open order. This only applies to closed order. They don't say that here, but that's the case. Dangerous terrain, you treat them as difficult terrain when you're in combat. So close combat, it doesn't do anything. You're not taking dangerous terrain tests for punching your opponent. Impassable terrain. So should a charging unit ever be unable to align to the enemy due to the presence of impassable terrain, you're forced to make a disordered charge. And this is kind of going into this close the door situation we talked about in the charging phase. So you charge an opponent, you hit them at an angle because you had to wheel. There's a really thick bush in the way. It's just so thick. Maybe it's on fire. Maybe it's a rock would be a better explanation for this, but I went with bush and we're sticking with it. So the burning bush is in the way. So you can't close the door. Your opponent can't close the door because both of you hate this bush. So this becomes a disordered charge and you lose like every kind of charge bonus you could ever think. You don't get ranks. You don't get initiative bonus. You're the worst. You're a loser.
You're both losers.
And you fight with that one guy at a weird angle. And anybody that comes and looks at your table is like, how did you even let this happen? Linear obstacles. So they can have a considerable impact on combat. Low linear obstacles, these disrupt charges, and they also disrupt ranks if a unit has to be like straddle them. So if you've got a barricade and half your unit is kind of on one side and half is on the other, you're considered disrupted for rank purposes. If a unit is behind a low linear obstacle, they can choose to defend it by moving its front rank into base contact. Enemies can charge the defenders as normal, but they do not physically cross the obstacle. Instead, the front rank moves into base contact with the obstacle itself. And unless they have the fly rule, a unit that charges an enemy behind a defended obstacle makes a disordered charge. So they don't get any initiative bonus.
That one's going to come up the most with the Earth and Ramparts spell, yeah?
Yes,
people summon the obstacles in front of themselves, which I think it actually is quite neat, especially when you think you're at a melee disadvantage. Or your dwarfs, send it.
Yep, high linear obstacles.
Dwarfs, I meant slow army.
Yes. So high linear obstacles, the only difference here is they're too tall, so you treat them as impassable terrain. Battlefield decorations, do what you want. If they're more than 2 inches across, they're impassable. If they are less than 2 inches, you and your opponent figure it out. Like, why'd you put that on the table anyway?
That's it. What is it? Why is it there? Are those crumbs? Could you not eat Doritos at the table again, Danny?
Yeah.
Ben Sherwin.
Wow, you get personal there.
All right. Wow.
Anyway, so that pretty much encompasses the combat phase. Dickie, how impactful have you found the terrain to be in the fight phase, in the combat phase?
Ironically, the low linear obstacle did come up in a few games because Bretonians have those little stakey things.
Mate, it's a good band. They're pretty relevant at the moment. The Grammys just happened. Maybe next year will be our year. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. It's not like the Bretonian archers are going to do anything with the disrupted charge, but it's nice to have, I guess.
Yeah, it's cute. Yeah, why not? I mean, they're less, possibly even less deaded. That's where you want to be.
Oh, they're dead, but
they're so dead. They're so dead. Less dead, though. That brings us to the end of our review of the combat phase. Now, this is, like we said at the start, probably where the vast majority of your games are going to be won and or lost. And so being straight up and down about it and being, crossing your T's, dotting your I's and making sure you have a thorough knowledge of what is going to happen once you get here is going to be a big deal. I would say that, like, unlike previous phases that we've gone through, this phase is the culmination of your turn's work. At least I like to believe. Your charge phase sets up this directly. Your movement phase sets up your next turn's charge phase, where you moved, what you redirected, where you decided to go, what flanks you tried to push, set up your next charge phase. Your shooting phase clears the chaff so you can get to your charges, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, all the magic you do therein incentivizes this. So this is the culmination essentially of the game. Is every turn you get to the fight phase and you decide and you figure out who is winning the game so far, is essentially how I like to think about it. Because after the end of every turn, it's very clear to see who won that round of combat. But speaking about it holistically, Peter, is it too much of the be all and end all of this edition? Should it have been a little bit more like 8th edition, where I do think people did not like the fact that you could just win the game in the magic phase, you could just win the game in the shooting phase, you could just win the game in the fight phase. But from a holistic game design point of view, it made sense to distribute power fairly evenly, even though I think it was overall the power was too high in all of those things. It could have bid on the same like percentages of the ability to win the game, but just the power comes down on all of them. But what do you think it is for the old world?
I do wish that I think Magic's in a mostly good place. I do wish shooting was a little stronger for some of the other armies. I think Lizardman shooting is fine. I'm happy with it. Wood Elf shooting is definitely fine. Don't make that better. But I feel like I think some of the other shooting was nerfed just a tiny bit too much. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm going to play into a competent dwarf player that's not Dickie someday and be like, oh man, I made a mistake. I have to go back and delete that episode. But I feel like I really love the fight phase the way it is now. Yeah. It's like my favorite part of the new game. I do feel like we could buff shooting a tiny bit for a couple armies.
I think that it's just the negatives of shooting that they're so drastic. Like you're hitting on 4s for the most part in most shooting phases, and it's so quick to go to 6s. It's like, oh, I'm long range.
Yeah.
And -1
cover and
Yep. I do feel like, if anything, I feel like Magic just got rewritten. So comparing 8th edition to Old World Magic is kind of not fair, because I feel like it just is a completely rewrite of how the system works. But 100%, you can definitely compare shooting across multiple different editions and different games. And I would say that I've never played a game that a rank and flank game that disincentivized shooting as much as this one. Not only because the modifiers are horrific, but I have so much. Me as the player taking the shooting pieces has so much less agency in what I shoot. Terrain matters so much more. Line of sight is so much more prohibitive, and like you just have so many more, brass rings to reach for before your shooting gets competent. And most armies start at an incompetent level of shooting. Like you just take your elven, crossbowman, and you're like, I've got 10 shots and I hit twice and I wounded once.
Yeah, I would say that
pointless.
I would say ballistic skill shooting specifically. I think template shooting is still very good. Like cannons are still good. They're still very good, especially dwarf cannons. I think lobbers, rock lobbers are still very good as well. So any template weapon feel fine. Yes, you have to roll on the 4-ups on partially covered models, which really take those numbers down, but I think it's okay. It's just the ballistic skill feels bad.
Well, this is the combat phase. We're talking about the combat phase.
Oh, right.
No, this isn't. Sorry, that's not me. I let it roll. It was good stuff. Anyway, that is going to bring us to the end of this part 1, guys, of your beautiful episode 6 of That Old World Charm. Thank you very much for everyone who supported us so far. You've been absolutely amazing. People checking us out on Spotify and all the other aggregators which we've been populated on. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much for the support of Goonhammer. Thank you very much to all the other podcasts that spruik us on their shows. We will continue to spruik you on ours. We already mentioned Unbroken, Old World Unbroken. I'm going to shout out Square Based, who I continue to listen to every week and truly look forward to.
Beautiful souls.
Beautiful. Well, no, their souls are filthy, but they're lovely people.
Well, Val's is filthy because he's in finance, but
dude, he is, isn't he?
Wait, Dickie's also in finance. Everybody, get down.
It's run. And you never heard from us again. And lastly, I'd like to shout out the Dwellers Below, my lovely Aussies. I can't wait to be rolling some dice with them someday in the future, and really enjoying their content as well. Anyone else you guys would like to shout out for their support and spruik?
I'll shout out my mom.
Oh,
thanks, Mom.
Yeah, she goes all right.
What's she saying?
Oh, she's just living her best life. Like, there's not much to say. She's just a good woman.
Good people.
I'd like to shout out my dog Hobart. His name is Hobart, yes. He's sleeping at my feet right now. And I always wonder if you're going to be able to hear his snores because he pops off. Because he's awake all freaking night going nuts at possums and stuff in our window. He's like constantly under attack. But yeah, shout out to my puppy.
Good boy.
Shout out to me editing this podcast in 5-6 hours.
The old Sking Priest doing his thing.
Just make sure you bleep out all the bad things I say.
Do not
all the good
just
things
get
I
to
say.
bleep one F word and then we're good to go.
bleep it. We're out of here. See you later.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to That Old World Charm with those charming chaps Adam, Danny, and Peter the Falcon. Thanks ever so much. Cheerio.